So I'm going to ask to join me on the stage, please, Frederic Kachar, CEO and Chairman of Editora Globo in Brazil. Frederic, if you're here. There he is. Hi. And hello. Aroon Purie, Chairman and Editor-in-Chief of India Today. Welcome. Hi. And finally, and at the last minute, and thank you very much for doing this, Fabrizio D'Angelo, CEO of Burda International. Thanks. So at almost no notice, Fabrizio has agreed to join us, so he's had the least time to digest the kind of questions we might be asking. Our other panelists might have had slightly more time to think about their answers, but some of this panel is just going to be a reflection on the conference so far and what we might have taken away. So what I'd really like to ask, let's take an opening question. The whole conference has been about change. Every presentation has talked about how organizations are changing themselves, changing their structures, how their markets are changing. So I'm going to take a wild guess and assume that all of your organizations are undergoing change as well. What's the single biggest factor for you that's driving change in your organization? What is it that's making you think, well, we need to make some alterations to the way we operate? Frederic, do you want to start?
Yes. So, I would say that it was mentioned a couple of times here, culture, but not just culture in terms of having a digital-first culture or a mobile-first culture, but culture as a whole, as having less silos, a team more integrated, a team that understands business models. I would say that our role now is much more chief culture officer than any other thing, because one important aspect of the culture change is the balance between what you need in your company. I mean, I see a lot of great guys that work with me that have really good speech and really good thoughts and ideas, but when it comes to execution, there's a big difference. A lot of great journalists or a lot of great advertisers with good sales skills, but with difficulties to understand business models. So I guess that the key for the success is balancing the culture. You need diversity. You cannot have a change that you put everyone with the same mindset in the company. And also, I mean, I see a lot of digital figures here, audiences, but business models fewer. And Duncan just mentioned, I mean, we want to distribute content and to search for money, or at least to sell advertising. So I think that we cannot at the same time accelerate the end of the print business. I mean, our role is to do the balance between diversity. You need a lot of skills together, but also between how you move forward with all this mobile and digital aspects that are the present is not the future anymore, but also not accelerating the death or the decline of print, because there's still a lot of opportunities there.
So print is still important for you. Do you think the changes that you're making are getting you ahead of what consumers are doing, or is it all being driven by the fact that you can see that your readers, the consumers of your media, are changing their own habits?
To be honest, I guess that until recently we were running behind, and I would say that at least in my country, all the print publishers were a little bit late to realize all the changes, but I would say that we are taking pace, and now we are at the same path, and sometimes in advance we realize the changes and we do it.
And I think we'll come back to some of those issues a little bit later, but Aroon, Purie, for you on India Today, are you going through change? And if so, what are the things externally that you see and that make you think you need to alter cultures or change the way you work?
Just to understand that, I'll give you a little background of my company. One is that we are a multimedia group. We have 4 24-hour news channels, 23 magazines, 4 radio stations, and dozens of websites. We started off as a news magazine company and then grew into other magazines. My present focus of change is, in fact, in the organization. And I founded this company 40 years ago, so I'm like a centennial. You know, I don't know. Everybody talks about millennials. There are people like me who are centennials. And what is driving change for me today is actually synergizing all these various media platforms, making journalists into multimedia journalists, sharing content, sharing ideas, getting them all working together. And this is being driven, of course, by the digital revolution, is the fact that it all converges into digital. The video we generate on our TV stations gets onto the video sites, on our websites. The content generated on our newspapers, and we have one newspaper, and the magazine is again used on the television channels. In fact, one of the key result areas I've given to our newspaper is that every morning there must be one big story that our television channels can carry. And similarly for the magazine, that they must have one investigative story or at least two to be carried on the TV channels every week. So there is this effort to change in order to use all these resources, which I think is going to converge into one. And just as a background, as part of this conference, we've gone through this process of change. In fact, we had Juan Sinon, who's presented the innovation, come and look at our organization about 5 years ago. Right? And so we started the process of change, and we're like, maybe, I don't know, halfway through it or 2/3 through it. And I come to this conference, and he changes the whole formula all over again. So I'm back to square one.
Well, it's clearly a sales technique. You need him back every 5 years. It's the repeat purchase impetus from. But are you finding that those changes are being easily accepted by your people, or is it a tough path?
It's a struggle. It's a struggle.
So I'd like to return to exactly that issue. The people piece, I think, is really important. But Fabrizio, for you, what are the things out there in the world or within your own organization that are driving the need to make changes?
At Burda, the answer is very simple. We have a visionary, to an extent a little bit crazy owner, who in the mid-90s really was impressed by the consequences of what he saw as the digital revolution, and started very early experimenting, really. Some people even said wasting money in the beginning, but we have an accumulated wealth and repository of digital knowledge by now. Half of the group is digital business, and sometimes non-content related digital business. That's a powerful accelerator. Then our task is to find a way for what it was the magazine group or the publishing activity to establish a viable business model in the digital world. But the powerful accelerator is that there is digital knowledge available in my group, and we can profit from it. So that's a huge engine of change.
So let's stay with that, and we've mentioned people in all of your responses to that question. And we've seen all sorts of approaches at this conference, from pay rises for people that pass a coding certification to, frankly, exit for those people that simply aren't willing to make the changes that are needed. How are you handling the people side of things? How easy has it been for you to persuade the people that work with you and that work for you to go with the flow, to move with changes? Is it happening as fast for them as you think it ought to?
It's never fast enough. It can't be fast enough, and there is a whole mix of invitations, threats, executions. Once in Russia, I said to my CFO, "Well, now it's all about execution," and he looked at me and said, "And who exactly should we execute?" You see, so I think when we say it's all about execution, I think the part of it, it's very literal, and it's every cultural change. I think is a mix of skills, commitment, and vision. So you need to have the three elements, and we need new skills, completely new skills that were not present, new job descriptions, new setup for the offices. We need commitment, so people need to be really willing to see themselves in the new world, in the new setup, and you need to spend the money necessary. So the remarks of Duncan about how much it costs, it is an investment. It is a fundamental investment, because most of what you have just doesn't suit, doesn't fit. So it's renewal, complete renewal.
So, Aroon, you mentioned, I asked you briefly about how your people had responded, and I got the impression it wasn't always a smooth path. How have you coped internally with these changes? You mentioned you brought at least one outside consultant in, but are you bringing people in from the outside? Is it a case of sort of repurposing your existing teams in new directions?
Well, I mean, we got a kind of blueprint of what we need to do, but the actual execution is what Fabrizio said, is the fact that you have to deal with people in many different ways. We tried the carrot with journalists, that if you file for the web, we pay you extra. It still doesn't work. Right? We tried the stick, meaning like, you won't get any increment. Even that doesn't work too well. But I think that what works is once they start believing in it, that the fact that their future depends in the digital world, that their audiences get amplified, they get reactions, they get into this of being in social media, of actually realizing the power of digital, which is what I think really makes the change. And I think we've reached that cusp where this is happening within our organization. I'm in fact finding that on the business side, where you try to converge everybody, the television guys, the radio guys, and the digital, is actually more difficult in terms of getting them to work together, in terms of making offerings to advertisers and advertising agencies. Because on the other hand, the advertising agencies are not even organized that way. They also work in silos, and they're yet to kind of merge the two. So it's a work in progress, but we all know which direction we're going to. It's a question of how fast you can make it.
And I think that's a theme that, again, we've heard it's all about speed. We've all got to the point where we know we have to do it. It's just a matter of how fast. So, Frederic, for you, is it happening smoothly? Are your teams accepting of the change that's necessary, or is there a need for executions along Fabrizio's lines?
First of all, I mean, I guess I didn't mention about the companies I run. It's all about content, so it's all about people at the end. I mean, the only and the biggest asset that we have is our team. I guess that the crisis that we're living in Brazil now, I mean, not only the print media decline that started in 2008, but what is happening with the country with a lot of executions beyond the print business. It's accelerating naturally things. So I would say that inside things are moving fast, and not because of me. I cannot take the honor of that, but because the crisis is forcing everyone to move fast, to see that we need to find a sustainable format and business model. But it's not about only the people that are inside, but also about what we attract. And I see a quite big difference between attracting editorial staff and commercial staff. To attract young and talented editorial staff is not that hard. Our brands are quite strong among millennials, and actually it's a shame sometimes that we have less spots to fulfill than good, talented people applying to the company. On the commercial side, however, is a little bit different, because as we see sales declining, as we see becoming tougher to offset what's going on with print on the digital side, we know that salesperson, it's all about commissions and meeting goals. And we compete with other media segments like pay TV that is booming in Brazil, or even the technology companies. So attracting young and talented commercial staff has become an issue for us. And that's why I believe that culture and having a company with a different and modern culture with less layers and no silos and really integrated will be the tool to attract these people.
Great. So there's a common thread here that people change is essential. We heard yesterday about architectural change. You know, people are moving buildings, people are remodeling. But let's move on for a moment to technology. And one of the threats we heard a great deal about was ad blockers, and the fact that the way that consumers are evolving their use of media is attempting sometimes to bypass some of the advertising-driven models we've been used to. What should our response be to an advertising resistance consumer base? If people are beginning to find ways of avoiding ads, do we find technological ways of defeating that desire, or do we find different models?
I guess it's a combination of everything. First of all, let me make it clear, there's not enough data about ad blockers in Brazil. It's something relatively new. Our best estimation is that about 11% of the traffic contains ad blockers, but we don't have actual and audited figures so far. And I would say that the breakdown is similar to what it was presented here. If it's younger and male, it's bigger. If it's older and female, smaller. I think it's a combination of working with advertisers in smaller formats. I mean, no one wants to be reading something on a mobile and then it pop up something that covers the whole screen. I mean, I'm the first one to find the X and just close it. So it's developing more smart and more engaging formats on one side, and obviously what Axel Springer mentioned here yesterday, I think, charging for the ones that don't want to carry, that want to carry, the ad blockers. I mean, if you don't want to see any advertising at all, so you have to pay for it. So
which is a reasonable request.
For sure it is.
One would have thought.
Yes.
It makes sense. Aroon, is this an issue for you yet, this avoidance of advertising, this consumers being very resistant to it?
Not yet, but I'm sure it'll come. Because in India, you have the luxury of going to the future and coming back, right? So we know what's going to happen there, and I suppose we have to prepare for it. And I think that it'll either end up that the visitors on the sites will either have to pay more because there's no advertising, or the fact that some technological solution will come up where you fight this ad blocking.
But I guess that's going to be, and to you on this one, Fabrizio, if we start battling our consumers, they're going to be resistant. Are you finding any of this a challenge yet, or is it still a future threat?
I have to say, because of the portfolio of countries where I operate, it's not a big issue for me. But in general, I think that fighting against what the consumer is trying to do, it's the wrong path. So I think the point, much more the point, and we are seeing this through the other assets of the group, where the currency or the liquidity that we get from the users is not their availability to be invaded by our display ads, is their data. So if you collect enough data from people, you can sell the data. You don't have to invade their visual space with display that they don't want and then try to sell that display to someone. You can much rather try to collect better, deeper data with their consent and then sell the data. No, to the same advertisers. Find other ways, other options. I think a straight heads-on fight against the consumers sounds like a suicidal way to go. Then, of course, we should balance things and try to strike deals. But a peaceful way to deal with consumers' wishes, I think it's much healthier.
Now, I suspect, of course, there are plenty more topics we could discuss, but I know that time is limited, and I don't want to let you go without asking you to, and it's an easy task, this, just to summarize the entire two-day conference and think about what your takeaways are. So if you could take sort of one thing away, not necessarily from the presentations, but just talking to people and being here, what do you see as significant? And, or it may even be just a piece of advice that you'd like to give our audience. This is the most high-powered consulting panel you're going to get, so let's use their time in the most valuable way we can. So, Frederic, perhaps you could start. What have you taken away, or will you take away and think, that's significant, I should be aware of that?
Perhaps the speed of the changes that I have to put in place. It is always good. I mean, we have 1 year and another the conference, and to compare, I brought my notes from Rome, and to compare what I always take down important things that I see here, but also in between what I'm thinking about to apply in my company, and to compare what were my desires in Rome and what I took from here now. It seems clear that there's a lot of things that it was supposed to be done between Rome and here that wasn't quite executed, and we definitely need to be faster.
So it's that need for speed, and I guess what we've just seen, that kind of months to moments idea. We just need to ramp up the speed of adaptation and of change. So, Aroon, what are you taking away from your visit to Toronto?
I've seen over the years say from the Delhi conference 2011, maybe a little before that, is how the mood has changed amongst magazine publishers. Earlier, before that, it was like they just passed through a near-death experience. They were facing an abyss. Everybody was depressed. They were beating their chests. They didn't know what's going to happen to their businesses. Right? I think there's a change in mood, and that upbeatness I see more and more, and increasingly in this conference, really at a very high level. That people are hopeful, they're excited, there's an opportunity. I think that's a sea change. And people are looking at various models. There's no one size fits all. But that change of mood and the way that they're looking at this whole digital revolution, I think that's a terrific thing which has happened.
Excellent. And Fabrizio, for you, what will your memories of Toronto be?
First of all, the great Canadian hospitality. I have to say, it has been a pleasure, extreme pleasure to be here. And what I liked is that you start seeing solid, well-documented and proven success stories. I think that's a solid rock on which we all can build. I mean, I've seen The Atlantic, Cottage Life, Nat Geo. These stories are there, are real, they have been done. So I think we start having serious and real patterns of what can be done and what can be successful. This is what I take away. And that's why I think people now need to do the next step, which in my opinion is go deeper into the element of technology, because a lot of the solutions that we are waiting to find, the next solutions, are tech-based. That's why our CEO insists that we are a consumer media and technology company. He adds that part, which I think is absolutely essential, and I think that's the part where we are still studying. Everyone understands that this is a well of knowledge that it's not yet in our companies, it's not yet solid part of our know-how, it has to become. So we have some successes. I think we have to go deeper into the tech part, but it's clear that we can make it. And we, as my discussion was about the Titanic, we have hit the iceberg, and we are all still alive, which is a fantastic place to be. I really think so. So we just need to row a little bit faster towards the shore. But it's really I think the disruption has happened. The dramatic part has happened. So I agree with Aroon.
Okay. Well, what a great quote to close this session with. We've all hit the iceberg, but we're all still alive, which is absolutely tremendous. Can I ask you, please, to thank our panel for a great final contribution? Thank you. Thank you.